Hello and welcome to this read aloud of lines 853 to 1254 of Maria Headley's translation of Beowulf. This, as I said in the preview video, is the easiest part of Beowulf, I should say, in which to get lost. Lots of names, lots of places, lots of flashbacks. What's clear is that the audience of the poem knew all these stories already, and we don't. So I would really strongly recommend, more than any other segment of the poem, to watch and pay attention to my preview video before listening and reading these lines. This, again, is the post-game gathering after Beowulf's defeat of Grendel. I'm starting on line 853 on page 39. Off they went, the elderly officers and the young men behind them, all mounted, white men on white horses, praising their heaven-sent hero, Beowulf, with every word they spoke. Not north nor south, nor anywhere, they said, was there a man more qualified to be king. There was a lot of country between the coasts, a lot of open air beneath the sky, and even there, no one better to rule. Of course, this unfettered praise wasn't meant to blame Hrothgar for anything. No. That was a good king. They were giddy enough to gallop for the first time in years, pale horses racing on trails long unused, though famous once for being smooth. And a poet, a long-term comrade of the king, a man mindful of meter with a memory made of myriad myths, began to compose the tale of Beowulf, his enviable exploits and Geatish feats, the sentences rhyming rapturously, since now the man was elite enough for permanence. The Shope had opinions, and he shared them. Compare, contrast. Stories he'd heard about another warrior, Sigemund. Verses detailing that man's hidden past, stealthy acts, dark secrets spat only into his kinsman's ear, the world roaming of Wales' defiant air, all those old tales whispered to Fitela, from uncle to nephew, who'd together slain giants, their swords strong as their certainties. After he died, Sigmund was shaped into story glory for his crowning kill, cutting through the hide of a hoard holder, a dragon, whose cave he'd crawled inside, outrageously alone, without even Fitela. He was fortunate in his fortune hunting. His sword stabbed the serpent and sliced it like butter, straight through scale to stone, and the dragon died, leaving bounty and bones to Whale's son, who claimed the treasure for himself. He loaded his ship with glitter. The dragon, even dead, was so embittered it melted, smelting dark intention into the metal. These days, everyone knows Sigemund's name, the most famous exile. Far and wide he swung his sword, and his fortunes swelled in the years after King Heremod lost his way. That king was attacked and betrayed, stung in Jutland, ultimately undone. His mood swings had mauled his men, emboldened his foes, and fractured his friends. Senility was suspected, and his advisors sorrowed. Those who'd relied on him to think clearly, those who'd trusted the inheritor of the throne to behave as his daddy had, reigning righteously, paying promptly, shielding the shielding safety. Beowulf is surely such a man, adored by friends and men and every living thing, but other kings have hoarded horrors in their hearts. While the Shope spun, Danes and Geats raced, harrowing the highway with hooves. The sunlight was bright and brighter, and young men herded themselves to Heorot to gape at the gory glory therein. The king himself, hoary, hallowed hoard holder, ring bringer, came boldly from out of the woman's wing, good man incarnate, flanked by ranks of ladies, his queen beside him, and paced a path from maid hall to mead hall. Hrothgar stood on the stairs, staring at the ceiling he'd commissioned. Amid gold and gleam hung Grendel's attrition, a lacerated limb. First and most fervent, we give thanks to the ever-bearer for this sight. Our long struggle cleared in a single night. We've suffered years of whole harvesting here, but hard times are done at last. God is good. Grendel is gone. Only yesterday I thought my heart would never be mended. The evening rending endless, this house of heroes red rouged, my counsel risking life and limb to bed down in their home hall and defend this place from demons. Yet every morning dozens dead. Now, with an almighty assist, this man has done what no man did before. His mother, I forget who she is she still alive? Should be proud of her prince, in answer to prayers. Beowulf, regardless of whether your parents survive, you're my son now. Adoption won by wily work. Be good to me. I'll be good to you, I always say. You'll need nothing in life, boy. I'll feed you, fet you, and count you as my foundling. You're a king to be. I've decorated countless others, treated lesser warriors as brothers, and rewarded the inferior for fearlessness or what passed for it then. Now, though, my standards have shifted. You're more than a man, but an immortal. Your valor in this hall will live in legend. I implore the Lord to keep you, my ward, in his grace, and wield his power on your behalf. Beowulf, Ecgtheow's son, replied, We are lucky to be living, having gone into battle with only bright intentions against a stranger whose might we hadn't measured. I wish you'd been awake to watch me bring war to your enemy, to see him beaten, but it was not to be. I meant to put him in a headlock, lash him to his deathbed and bludgeon him, clench my fists around his throat, strangle till he gasped his last. But alas, the Lord set him free. What can I say? He slithered from my fingers like a serpent and slit my knots, screeching for the exit. He paid his passage in pulses, though, and left a limb behind, holding the door, his hand, arm, and shoulder. There they stayed, proof of his incursion, much as he regretted it. Behold, nothing could live limited like that. The last of his blood must have boiled by now, braiding itself about his body, chaining him in coils of pain. He's dying now, if not already dead, a sinner awaiting sentence. God, not me, will judge him. Previously prone to calling bullshit, Unferth, Ecglaf's son, was stymied as the roomful of nobles took note of the horrible hand hanging whole, armpit to fingertips, high in the eaves. The nails were notorious, hard as though smith-forged, and the heathen's hand was calloused as a carpenter's, weathered by work and warring. Everyone swore to what they'd seen. No sword could stab through that skin, no fight fang tear it. Then all hands were hauled on deck by order of the king to restore Heorot to its former splendor. Citizens, resurrecting glamour blunted by gore. The golden threads in tapestries, depicting scenes of sweeter times. Distractions and gleaming designs now hung haphazard in the ruined room, reinforced as the walls had been. They were still wreckage. Door hinges bent, braces broken, Only the ceiling remained uncracked. The intruder had fled first, afraid of expiring far from home. Death, no matter our desires, can't be distracted. We know this much is true, and it's true for all souls. Each of us will one day find the feast finished, and, fattened or famished, step slowly backward into their own dark hall for that final night of sleep. In due time, the Halfdane's heir appeared. Tonight, the king would dine triumphant at his own table, reclaimed from ruin. Never before had everyone shown up so festive, so fiery to pay tribute to their bounty bringer. Every major man was there, pounding cups of mead. Even the king shouted for rounds, his nephew, Hrothulf, there beside him, spirits flowing, hearts glowing in Heorot Hall. Back then, remember, the Scyldings were not yet inclined towards treachery, though things would change. Hrothgar gave his own father's sword to Beowulf, presented it formally, with it a helmet, mail shirt, and war banner, all precious property of his people. Beowulf drank deeply, pleased and petted, feted to the utmost, gifts raining down upon him like pennies from heaven. The Halfdane's sword, the gold, the glitz, the rest of the hall soldiers watched it happen. I mean, personally, I've never seen anything like it. So many treasures sliding down the table, a battle dowry moved from man to man, over ale no less. No fighting? No fury? Nope, bro, this was a certain type of knight. The golden helmet, for example, was ringed with ridges, wrapped in wire to tire any sword that sought the skull of a shield warrior occupied with other enemies. Now the king called for 8 steeds to be led into the hall, each in his own horse helmet, harnessed in gold, and one mare was buckled under Hrothgar's own saddle, the same saddle he used for swordplay, gem dripping, blinged out, brought forth only when the king himself was slain. That man, remember, was the first to fight in wartime, the first to kill, swinging before any of his boys could be slain. Ing's descendant dropped all these delights upon Beowulf, the weapons, the horses, ordering him to use them in health. Yet the Lord of Heorot, Hrothgar, paid properly, tendered treasure for services rendered in blood. Anyone knows how fair it was, bro. More than fair. And more than this even, the king bequeathed to each of the sea soldiers on Beowulf's bench, every life risker got a golden gift of his own, and the man who'd been assassinated by Grendel was vindicated in treasure. The invader would have murdered many more had God not gotten in the mix. One man's mettle kept the rest from massacre. You have to look at it this way and reconcile yourself. God's in charge. Always has been. Always will be. And anyone who lives long will endure both ecstasy and ugliness. It was an hour for singing then, and instruments were hauled out for the battle-bringing king, who called for harps, epics, and heroic histories. Halgemen, Hrothgar's poet, was ready with rhymes, spitting the saga of the sons of Finn, word-whipping his way into the fight in Friesland, the day the Danish king, Hanaf of the Scyldings, fell to lack of fealty. Hildeburh had nothing tender to say about the Jutes and their loyalties. She'd surrendered son and brother here. Her home hall became a brutal battlefield, innocent of crime, yet cursed, captured, speared. Worse, Hawk's daughter was savaged by sorrow, grief gutted. Who wouldn't weep as dawn drove feud daggers deeper, the sun scoring her son's wounds, day breaking upon her dearest dead? They'd been her heart, her happiness, her hopes. War had run them ragged. dragged them to death across a cord of sword-crossed kin. There was no fighting now, no. Finn had only lack left. He could not attack from here and battle to the end with Hengist. Though this had been his own hall, most of the men were dead. What could Finn, the host, do to preserve the rest from their enemies? A truce was his only option. A partitioned hall, swords split in half, the Danes quartered in one portion, the Frisian throne and edifice now a shared territory. Daily, he'd give gifts to both sides. His hands open as widely to Hengist and his men, unwillingly ruled over by their ring lord's reaper, as to his own men, the Frisians. They'd all been encouraged in encomiums, given hope with heirlooms. Everyone would be hostage to hall jollity, and beer would be drunk without jeering, both sides pacified by precious things. This, then, was the treaty. The arrangements was sealed in gold. The agreement was sealed in gold. All former fighters guaranteed greed grace. It was sworn solemnly to Hengist by Finn, and any Frisian who broke it, who thought he might divide the room, with whispered insults, raising recent wrath with snide ribbing, would be pricked. The sword's point would decide. The pyre was built, gold unhoarded, to properly mourn the Scyldings' king, who slumbered on his death weld, awaiting warmth he'd never feel. The landscape was littered with reddened metal, mail coats gored, links bent, boar-shaped helmets dented where swords had scraped skulls. Other bodies, too, of noble Danes, unraveled by gaping wounds, traveling to journey's end. Hildebert sent her son to his last station at Hnaef's shoulder, their sole vessels to be burnt together, finally, family, in flame. She raised her voice in mourning, keening for her kin as the pyre was lit. Smoke smothered her song, darkness made of skin and bone. These men, who'd been tended by those who loved them, were carcasses now, heads melted, wounds running, reopened for flame ravens. Fire comes from the same family as famine. It can feast, unfulfilled, forever. The dead of both nations were done, glory days gone for good. Fighters fell away, finding families and forts across Friesland, visiting the living, too long close-quartered with corpses. Hengist, though, bordered a wicked winter in Finn's hall, heart howling for his own king and hearth, the weather too wild to loosen his ship. For him, the ice and snow were tinted red, and kept him clinging to a killing country. At last, as always happens, the season shifted to spring, another year appeared, sunlights, green tendrils, the earth's bosom in bloom, a time for returning, the exiled yearning for home. But more than that, to get it done with, the avenging, without which Hengist would be unmanned. He itched to bring justice to Jutes. When Whole-Laughing lay a legendary sword in his lap, well, it was named Flame Fang for a reason. Any season is a season for blood, if you look at it in the right light. The Jutes knew this blade already. They should have expected it to twist, to key their kingdom. Hengist only did what he had to do. Tipped the pitchers, spilt the ale, red rivers running under wooden benches. Finn fell when Guthlaf and Oslaf, hard henchmen, brought up the last winter's battle, blaming brutality on their bold host and their grief on him too, the pain of their loss unquenched, the only remedy blood balm. The Scyldings washed the walls with rancor, slew Finn and all his men, and bore away his world queen. They ransacked the hall for a hoard, grabbing all the treasure they could hold, golden collars, jewels. Onward then, over the sea and back to Denmark, they brought their woman, straight-spined, returning her to the country she came from. That Dark entertainment was done. Words had won over wine long enough. Now laughter conquered conversation. Serving boys poured pleasure from pitchers. Wealtheow, weighted in gold, processed to her place between two good men, Hrothgar and his nephew Hrothulf, who back then yet trusted in the links of lineage. There, too, waited Unferth, at the feet of those men, the Scyldings' lords, who trusted him too. Perhaps not as much as they trusted themselves, but still, brave man, though a sibling slayer, brilliant, though a brother breaker. The lady offered up all she had to trade. Accept this cup from me, my lord of rings, and lift this golden goblet. Give the Geats their due. Be good to them who've been good to you. Gifts are for granting, and your hands should be open, your hearts happy, even as you remember, I know you do, the good men who gave kith gifts to you. Heorot's red walls have been whitewashed, purged of horror. And I hear you've chosen a brand new son, this Cain-cleansing warrior. I know you know that life is short, that you are mortal. The blessings you bask in today are boons for bequeathing. I ask only that you gift the kingdom to your kin, for your sword is sheathed in smoke. I know your nephew, Hrothulf, well, his noble blood, his moral code. He'll serve our sons and raise them right. I trust he'll treat them sweetly, if you should die before he does, repaying our kindness with son safety. We took him in when his father died, and if he recalls it at all, he knows how to behave. We gave the orphans everything, made him one of our brave men when he'd have been alone. She bent then to her boys' bench, where Hrethic and Hrothmund sat with all the young sons of chieftains. There too was a grown man, good great Beowulf the Geat, positioned between them. She brought him the cup. She called him friend. She gave him gold. Her will was wrought in rings. She offered armlets, garments, a neck ring, a collar larger than any I've ever seen, heavy as heaven is light, and all of it brighter and better than any hoard since Hamas, who himself hooked the flaming throat chain of the Brisings, those amber god reins, and trekked it back to his own fortress, fleeing Eronric's treachery and securing his soul with gold barter. And later, hear it, Hygelac the Geat, Swerting's nephew, would be the final owner. In his last battle, between banners, he'd hold to his hoard, fighting furiously. Shackled to this sparkling string, this precious poisonous thing, fate would fell him in his prideful priorities, the Frisians following his feud fuel, and he in heavy armor, gem covered, would be slain. He'd worn that same sparkle when he crossed the sea coop, but even champagne goes flat. His bling would go to Frankish kings, from plundered breastplate to that famous throat chain, and lowlier warriors would gloat over the goners, getting what gold they could from Geat corpses, a field full of the forgotten. The hall thundered with handclaps. Wealhtheow went on with her gift-giving, thus witnessed. Take this golden collar, dear Beowulf. May it keep your head on straight. Wear this mail shirt, too, a treasure of my people. May it protect your heart hoard. Guide my two sons. Guard them. Keep them as they are tonight, and I will keep you as you are, draped in delights. You're famous here, and long after your lifetime you'll be known. Your story sweeping as the sea, shores borne into being by waves of words. My prince, may you be blessed by this bounty. Keep my sons close. Treat them as we treat one another here in Heorot, tenderly, trustingly, loyally. No one conspires to hurt, only to hold fast with brothers. Believe me, Beowulf, my thane's wishes align with mine. The sole desire of those drinking here is to do my bidding when it comes to you. She settled into her seat. Wine waterfalled into men's mouths. It was a banquet unmatched in munificence. After all, They had no foretelling of fate's fixed plans. A shadow stretched over sweetness, formless and fatal. Night fell, and Hrothgar readied himself for rest, his quarters calling him to sleep. Men stood guard as they always had. The floor then, the floor that bristled with benches, became a swan road, white waves of bolster and feathers, and though none of those drinkers turned dreamers was doomed, he didn't know it. The Geats' shields served as shining headboards, and on each bench was arranged a helmet, hulking, a mail shirt with rings like linked fingers, and a splinterless spear, tree sleek, ready for wrath any time, to be brought into play without notice, as was the habit of their homeland and war wanderings. They were ready to wreak havoc any time, any place. Their lord was a lucky lord. The Geats were hardcore, but even Geats need sleep, so sleep swept them away. One dreamer would die dreaming. This was nothing new, given Grendel's former residence in the Golden Hall, but his eviction had made evil dwindle in the minds of the defenders. That story, they thought, was over.